So, it appears that the Jurassic World Velocicoaster is finally among us, and it's quite the beast. The apex predator of roller coasters, as it were. Normally, I do a much more in-depth analysis of attractions because I tend to focus on dark rides, but this is going to be a little bit different. It's not that the coaster doesn't have a story to tell, but the focus is very much on the experience of the track layout and its various elements. It's an intensely wild ride. As the channel focused on dark rides, today we're going to instead be focusing on the layout of this coaster. We're going to be breaking down why it's a great addition to Islands of Adventure and answering a lot of questions about why it exists and how it compares to something like, say, The Incredible Hulk. When we think of Universal Parks in Orlando, we likely think of themed dark rides. However, Universal does like to stick in a large, eye-catching coaster or two into each park. When Islands of Adventure opened in 1999, it premiered The Incredible Hulk, a B&M looper with a launch, and Dueling Dragons, two B&M inverted coasters that uniquely dueled over the skies of the Lost Continent. Lacking a big, visually pleasing coaster, Universal Studios Florida would build Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket in 2009. If we look at the concept art for Universal's upcoming Epic Universe, we can also see three coasters, one contained within a themed land, and the other two dueling each other in the hub area of the park. When the Wizarding World of Harry Potter came to Islands of Adventure in 2010, Dueling Dragons was incorporated into the land. It was rethemed to Dragon Challenge, an inferior retheme in my opinion. However, what really killed the attraction was the choice to remove the dueling elements in 2011, dispatching the trains separately, reportedly due to safety concerns with loose articles. The coasters were still pretty decent, but the dueling aspect was a huge draw of what made it unique. Despite the coasters being excellent, they never really made sense with the Potter theming, and so were replaced with the incredible Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure in 2019. While sad to see the coasters go, Hagrid's is a more than worthy replacement. Reportedly the most expensive coaster ever created, it's a highly themed and immersive experience that also happens to be the most technically complicated roller coaster in the world. It features 7 launches, 3 switch tracks, a vertical spike, 2 drop tracks, and I believe can run a maximum of 12 trains and is completely computer automated. That's an astounding number of elements that must be working perfectly all the time, and I don't think that the average person realizes how technically complicated it is. However, despite being on the more intense side of a family coaster, especially with that surprising drop track, Islands was still missing the element of intensity provided by Dueling Dragons. Sure, Hulk was still an excellent signature coaster of the park. It was actually retracked and reopened in 2016. However, the removal of dragons left a void, one now filled by the Velocicoaster. As you enter the courtyard, you encounter the Zero-G stall, an impressive element that flies over the bridge. As you turn to your right, you see the impressive entryway and the newly repainted Jurassic Park Discovery Center on your right. The Velocicoaster is in a weird thematic limbo, where it's supposed to take place in Jurassic World, and yet, here's the Discovery Center. However, with the extremely positive reception of the new Jurassic World The Ride in Universal Hollywood, it doesn't seem inconceivable that the River Adventure won't eventually receive this retheme as well. The thematic clash here also doesn't bother me because that's always been the design philosophy behind Islands of Adventure. Each land is anchored by large, iconic structures and are meant to be juxtaposed with one another anytime you reach the waterfront. This weird mini-land of the Velocicoaster fits with the style that the park has established, and even if it's something that bothers you, the area at least still looks fantastic. The story behind the coaster is simple. Whereas with Hagrid's you're supposed to feel like you're flying on a motorcycle and ignore that the track is there, The Velocicoaster is simply a coaster built in Jurassic World that's meant to get you up close and personal with the raptors in their paddock. There's not much story here, but the intent of the coaster is to build something iconic and intense for the park. Sometimes, less is more, and that idea is applied in the queue. As you enter, you first encounter this giant art piece depicting the raptors with the iconic element of the coaster, called a top hat, behind them. The general aesthetic of the queue is a lot of sleek gray with simple but impactful elements scattered throughout. For example, the entryway is defined by the statue, and a queue video hosted by Mr. DNA from the first Jurassic Park explains the basic premise of the ride. As you continue into the queue, you enter a dark room that's reminiscent of the ceiling grates and the raptor attack from the first film. Here you can see the coaster fly through as it launches into the top hat, and raptors run by as they attempt to chase it. From what I can gather, there are a few different variations of this scene. Next, you enter into a room with an expository queue video hosted by Dr. Henry Wu, the chief genetic engineer of Jurassic World. Last, you move through a room that features these incredibly realistic raptor animatronics that snort and growl at you, occasionally shaking their cages violently in frustration. From this point, you enter the locker area, located conveniently inside the building right before you ride. If you've ever used Universal's lockers, the often extremely crowded and humid locker rooms are a nightmare to move around. Another issue is that they are located in front of the attractions, and for coasters like Rocket or Hulk with metal detectors at the front of their queues, you might be waiting quite a while without your phone. Universal has continued to learn in addressing this problem by providing new and spacious locker areas for The Mummy and Forbidden Journey, but Velocicoaster takes it a few steps further. Obviously, you can now wait with your phone throughout the majority of the queue in case you want to record some of its more exciting elements, but the lockers are also double-sided to reduce congestion. You put your stuff in one side, and as you exit the ride, retrieve it from the other. Simple, but effective, and they're themed to dinosaurs with Mr. DNA spieling from an instructional video above. From here, you move through metal detectors upstairs to the load platform and encounter one last queue video hosted by Claire Deering, head of Jurassic World. In essence, the video explains that the Velocicoaster will be getting you up close to the raptors in their paddock, and the head raptor trainer, Owen Grady, is quite unhappy about it. As you round the corner to board the train, you can see a large window that overlooks the raptor paddock and can watch the train fly through it. You now board, and the experience begins. The Velocicoaster is all about airtime, and this is achieved through an over-the-shoulder lap restraint. Yes, it does come down above your head, but you're only held in around the lap, leaving you feeling quite exposed. As you leave the station, you encounter a scene where Owen Grady is attempting to keep the raptors under control. However, the train parks and backs up in a similar way to Slinky Dog Dash, and as it gets ready to launch, the raptors are released. From here, the train flies around the raptor paddock, and while it doesn't look very fast from the outside, it feels very forceful as it pushes you out of your seat. You encounter the iconic raptors from the film as you move around the track, narrowly avoiding them. The raptors are static statues and have a strobe effect at night to simulate movement, but you move past them quickly enough that you don't really have time to register anything other than a narrow miss. This first half of the ride is called a spaghetti bowl, an industry term for a condensed section of track that continues to overlap itself, here providing a lot of head chopper moments as you move through the elements and inversions. It's quite disorienting and difficult to understand where you are in relation to the rest of the ride, but is still quite fun. As you complete this portion, you enter the second launch and fly 70 miles an hour into the top hat. From here, you dive down into the courtyard and are thrown back up into the zero-G stall. The track circles around the bridge in the lagoon, going through a number of elements that keep you out of your seat, and finally ends with a barrel roll, or as the team members described it, a Mosasaurus roll, as it's supposed to be going over the Mosasaurus enclosure, and you can sometimes hear it roar from the courtyard. As you finish the course, you find yourself moving through some brake runs on your way back to the station, where you disembark. So, how good is the Velocicoaster just for its elements? Well, I was fortunate enough to be able to ride more than once, and I wasn't really that impressed on my first ride. Part of the reason for that, though, is that I think it defied my expectations in a way that confused me. I've been on a fair number of coasters, but the design philosophy here was something I hadn't experienced before. Manufactured by Intamin, this model of coaster, called the Intamin Blitz, focuses on forceful launches and emulates a lot of elements found on hybrid RMC coasters. For example, the Velocicoaster's largest competitor will be Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa, manufactured by RMC, which also has a lot of elements that feature inverted airtime as you quickly move through them. When you move through something like the barrel roll, it's surprisingly intense because you're not at all in your seat, held only by your lap restraint from falling into the water. It's also worth mentioning that in the moment, it feels like you're only inches from the water despite us seeing otherwise. But here's the thing, if we compare it to something like the Hulk, it's a completely different experience. Whereas the Hulk focuses on positive G's, the Velocicoaster is all negative. To elaborate, positive G's are the G-forces on a coaster that keep you in your seat. The Hulk is all about pummeling you with force as you're launched into an inversion, and the majority of coasters are focused on achieving this. In contrast, the Velocicoaster confused me in that while you felt a lot of positive G's when you were being launched, the rest of the coaster is almost exclusively negative G's, and that it tries to force you downwards faster than your body will fall. Because of the lap restraints, it also leaves you feeling like you're falling out of the train in the inversions and whippy elements, especially during the more ambitious second half. This leads to the coaster not feeling nearly as physically intense as the Hulk. It almost leaves you feeling floaty. However, as I said before, I was fortunate enough to ride more than once, and it completely changed my mind. I wasn't sure how to feel about my first ride because it defied my expectations, but coming to understand what it was and what it was trying to achieve, I've definitely changed my mind. In retrospect, I've also come to realize that despite the floaty feeling, it is quite physically intense on your body. I've always come off of it shaking, and started to experience a lot of muscle soreness after riding. You don't realize it in the moment, but the force of the coaster actually causes muscle fatigue, especially in your legs, which is definitely a new feeling for me coming off of a coaster. While Dueling Dragons contrasted with the Hulk because it was inverted, it's still very much focused on those positive G's. With the Velocicoaster though, its stance is being more directly juxtaposed, and that's a good thing because it makes the two coasters feel more unique, adding more variety into the park and balancing it out. Taken into consideration with Hagrid's, which obviously appeals to that family demographic, this park has a world-class lineup of 3 exceptional large coasters. So, does the Velocicoaster deliver? Absolutely. It is indeed the apex predator of roller coasters, and is a worthy replacement for the thrilling elements lost from Dueling Dragons. The theming, while simple, is extremely effective in execution, and the coaster itself makes sense for the park in pushing audiences into a different sensory experience from its neighbor across the lagoon. It's a fantastic example of what to put into a park compared to, this giant mess. Seriously, why does Islands get all the good rides? The studios have Mummy, which is fantastic, but Gringotts is more dark ride than coaster, and Rocket, while great looking for the skyline of the park, is downright bad. To go on a mini rant, the idea of syncing music to the ride has always felt like a ripoff of Rocket Roller Coaster at Hollywood Studios, and the layout here is quite terrible. I despise that vertical lift, and the coaster can't even commit to having an inversion. It otherwise is rough and uninteresting, and while a crowd pleaser for the general population of the park, is overshadowed by the Hulk and now Velocicoaster. But I digress. Are you excited for the Velocicoaster and how it works as an incredibly solid addition to this park? I'm very interested in seeing how Iron Gwazi competes with it. If you're a pass holder who has also ridden it, I'd definitely be interested in hearing your opinion and what your experience was. As always, leaving a like on the video helps us reach a wider audience, and if you like my video essays but are not yet subscribed, you can of course hit that subscribe button and bell notification to be alerted when new videos are released.